Welcome to Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and this is the 2022 Lexus UX 250h. Lexus sells this as the smallest SUV in their lineup. It is truly listed under the SUVs on their website, but this is a hatchback. And hatchbacks in America are kind of treated like vegetables. People know that they're good for you, but they've had some bad experiences. They think they're kind of questionable for how much they really want to consume them. And ultimately you have to call it something else a lot of times and cover it in bacon and butter and all that to get people to actually eat them and enjoy them. So let's talk about what this 2022 UX 250h is, and we'll get it on the road and see how it is to drive both as a city car and a highway car. Now, before we get too far into this, as always, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you think what we're doing is pretty rad. We really appreciate all that support, and it helps us do more and more as the days and months go on. So with that, on to this Lexus UX. So what is the UX? So this, like you can see, is not a particularly tall vehicle. It's not particularly large either. I'm about 6'1" and I tower over it. This is based on the GA-C platform from Toyota, which means nothing to any of you, but it's the same platform that underpins the Corolla Cross, and the Prius. And that's important because it is a compact platform, it is a compact car, and actually, if you think hatchbacks, this is within 2 inches in just about every dimension of a Volkswagen GTI. And it is the most affordable way to get into a Lexus that is not sedan shaped. These start at about $36,000 for this 250h, which is the hybrid model. They also have a UX 200, which is gas only. And in both cases, they're powered by drivetrains that aren't particularly quick. So let's talk about those drivetrains. So up front here, you've got the choice of 2 different drivetrains, and I say 2, but it's really more like 1.5 because Lexus takes the same 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder and uses that as the basis for every UX that you can buy here. The basic UX 200 is a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, it's that 2-liter, that makes 169 horsepower and feeds it to the front wheels or all 4 wheels through a continuously variable transmission. Getting this hybrid model takes the exact same drivetrain and adds a battery and an electric motor to the mix. Your total power output goes up to 181 horsepower, but the kicker here is that neither one is really faster than the other. If you look at their power to weight ratios, which is how many pounds each horsepower has to move before anybody sits down in the car, the UX 200 has to move 19.5 pounds for every horsepower. The UX 250h has to move 19.9 pounds for every horsepower. So neither one is really faster than the other, and truthfully, approaching 20 pounds per horsepower means both of these on paper are going to be pretty slow. Now, the biggest gains that you will get from buying the hybrid version of the UX are going to be with fuel economy. Both the UX 200 and the UX 250 are rated for about 38-39 miles a gallon on the highway, but where the 250h comes into its own is in city driving, of course. It's just like every other hybrid, that is where they all shine. The UX 250h is rated for 12 miles per gallon more in the city than the UX 200. This is rated at 41 miles per gallon in city driving. We'll talk about how that's actually going for me. I've been driving this car around Washington, D.C., so we'll talk about that in just a minute. Moving around back here, you see the hatch of this car is absolutely a hatchback. It is not the biggest thing in the world, but it is, of course, still a hatch. The back seats do fold down so you can put longer items in here. The thing that is a little disappointing to me back here is that this load floor is really high. This is a false floor. You can lower it down a few inches, or you can just leave it to store a few extra things down here, but the load floor is weirdly high. The bumper liftover is kind of high. It just feels a little tight back here in the cargo area for being a hatchback. And that theme does persist through the rest of the interiors. All right, so let's talk about driving this Lexus UX 250h. And before we get much into the driving part, I want to talk about colors because they offer some fantastic paint colors and interiors on this car. It's really nice to see some real colors offered with paint by a manufacturer, especially a luxury brand. Lexus has this beautiful blue on this car, which is called Grecian Water. We've seen that on some other Lexuses. They've also got Nori Green, which is a very pretty green, and then they have a good orange and a red. The interior of this one is a 2-tone kind of light white color and lapis blue, which is really, really nice. Very interesting. I don't know if I love how they did the 2-tone as far as how the seats kind of look capped off, but it's still really cool to have that kind of nautical feeling white and blue interior. And you've also got the top of the dashboard that's also blue. That's optional whether you want these white and blue seats or not. So with all that, let's talk about driving this UX250H. So if you've driven other hybrids, Toyota hybrids in particular, you will feel right at home. This operates exactly like a Prius. So that is to say, it can run on the battery, it can drive on the battery for brief periods of time, but the electric motor is not super duper powerful and the battery is not very large, so you're not going to go very far. Now, at this point, I am driving, I think, on the battery. I can't hear or feel the engine, but I can push this EV mode button. Well, I'm going too fast for it. So I'm going 27 miles an hour, and that is too fast for EV only mode. Regardless though, if you slow down, you can push EV mode and you can creep through parking lots or something at full electric, guaranteed, unless you drain the battery. So not really sure what this button is super helpful for if you can't even go 27 miles an hour with it. If you twist this drive mode dial to sport, which is a hilarious notion in and of itself, you can get an actual tachometer on the gauge cluster and you can see when the engine cuts off. And driving it around recently, the engine will cut off at speeds of 60 miles an hour. So, you know, if all conditions are met, it does cut the engine off to save you some fuel. I am averaging 34.2 miles a gallon right now, which is lower than what Lexus rates this car at. However, this car only has about 300 miles on it, so the gas motor's not broken in all the way yet. Things might loosen up and get a little bit better on economy. And it's fairly cold here, it's in the 30s, so that never helps either. I'm gonna go ahead and put the drive mode back to normal because sport, like I said, is kind of a hilarious notion. So hatchbacks in general are considered to be more fun than a lot of other cars because of cars like the Volkswagen GTI. And I keep bringing that up not because this car is a competitor to the GTI, just because it's generally that sort of size. The wheelbase is very similar, your interior space is generally similar, your overall dimensions are generally similar. This car is about 9 inches longer, I think just because of bodywork. It's not actually any bigger inside, at least it doesn't feel like it. But Lexus hasn't focused on making this fun per se. And I find it interesting because they do offer an F-Sport model of the UX, whether you get the 200 gas car or the hybrid 250H. I don't know why you would bother. You get, you know, slightly different seats, a slightly different gauge cluster, but there's really nothing fun about driving this. It's all about being quiet and calm and good on fuel and nice in here. And as far as niceties are concerned, I think the cabin is a generally nice place to spend time. It does have Lexus's older infotainment system, which does require that you use this touchpad. This is not a touch screen. It does have CarPlay and Android Auto, which is nice because their navigation in this case is a little outdated. There is a newer Lexus infotainment setup that just debuted on the 2022 NX, which is one size up from this car, and that I'm sure will trickle down to all their other models as they get redesigned. But this one is the older system. This is paired to a sound system that is not Mark Levinson branded, which is Lexus's, you know, upgraded sound. It is still very good. It is exceeding my expectations for a sound system given it's just the base setup. As far as the rest of the cabin, everything is nice in here. Everything is very quiet. Road noise is really good. You'll see when we get out on the highway. Road noise is great. Where I don't necessarily love this car is with how Lexus claims all of this center stack is angled toward the driver to make it more driver-centric, which, great. But this center console actually cuts toward the driver's seat at a bit of an angle, and it is forcing me to keep my right leg in a certain position because my knee hits the console. So I wish this was more of a straight line because I have long legs. I would have just a hair more room, and I think that would make me a little more comfortable. I also only have but so much headroom. The seat is as low as it can go, and again, not a ton of headroom. And so cruising around at these city speeds, you kind of have the gas motor kicking on and off. You can cruise around on just the battery for brief stints. And the one thing that I don't necessarily love with the way this hybrid setup works, you know, Toyota and Lexus hybrids have been very good for a very long time at this point. They're proven, they're well known, they're durable. What I don't love is that the refinement here is not that great. The transition from gas to hybrid mode is pretty seamless. It's not jarring or anything. But what I don't like is the fact that this four-cylinder is really kind of gritty and coarse, and it's not especially quiet or refined at all. It does not feel like it belongs in a Lexus. So don't really love that. When you're just cruising like this on battery power, or if it kicks the gas motor on to run at 1,000 or 1,500 RPM, generally unobtrusive. But When you have to rev it again for highway stuff, we'll get there in just a second, that's where things change a little. And the one final thing that's worth mentioning is the suspension as far as city driving. It's very well done. It is cushy without being excessively soft. It gives you a really good ride, both in city and on the highway, without being wallowy or too soft. And of course, it's not overdamped. No one's mistaking this for a sports car. Steering feel is also decent for what this is. I'm not complaining. It's just nothing particularly special either. All right, so we are approaching highway speeds here, and you'll see when I accelerate what I'm talking about as far as noise is concerned. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my foot down. And it's not the slowest thing, it's just got one rate of acceleration. Pulling out to pass people if you get caught behind slower cars is absolutely something you're going to have to plan for a little bit. It's not, you know, an instant gratifying burst of speed. Granted, no one's marketing this car as that, but you have to really work for it. And the other interesting thing with highway driving that I've found is unless you're using the cruise control, you really have to make sure your foot stays in it enough to maintain whatever speed you're doing. I have looked down several times and realized that I'm going below the speed limit because the car just kind of slips down below and you don't really realize it. So kind of an interesting thing there. With highway driving, Lexus does have a full driver assistance suite. Obviously, it's not self-driving. There are no self-driving cars on the road today. This one is pretty good. It is, I think, better than older Toyota and Lexus products I've driven that are, you know, not quite as good at the radar cruise control or the lane centering or all that. It's pretty easy to turn it on and set it, just 2 buttons, and change your following distance and whatever else. And it will steer you through turns and everything well enough. So definitely a nice feature, you know, for those longer drives. And again, at highway speed, the worst part is just listening to this 4-cylinder grumble under the hood. This is passing speed. And it, you know, it works. It's just, it kind of is what it is. And I don't think it necessarily befits the Lexus mantra per se. That's my only real complaint. As far as driving on the highway in this car in the UX, it is still relatively quiet. The ride is still pretty good. No real complaints with anything. I wish the space was utilized a little bit better, and I wish the motor was a little more unobtrusive. The thing with Lexus calling this an SUV, objectively it's hilarious, but they're not the only ones doing this with some of their vehicles. I can think of Kia. I've got a Kia Niro following me right now. It's the same deal. They're calling it a crossover. It's really a wagon or a hatch because we have learned that American consumers want things that are considered adventurous, and that is now the crossover and the SUV. So I don't fault them for it. I love the fact that this is an actual hatchback, that it sits low to the ground. It is just a car. It is not trying to be something it's not. You know, this one has all-wheel drive. It'll be helpful in snow and you know, loose gravel and whatever else if you drive on bad roads occasionally, but they're not making a claim that this is anything but what it is. I don't wish that this were bigger, rode higher, anything. I like what it is. I also think because they've really leaned into the hatchback vibe of this car, the proportions are so much better than a lot of these other subcompact SUVs, subcompact crossovers that everyone has decided they're building now. When you look at things like the Mercedes GLA, the BMW X1, the Audi Q3, you know, I was driving yesterday, and I saw an Audi A3 hatchback from 10 or so years ago. Those were wonderful cars. The problem is not a lot of people want a premium hatchback. They think of hatchbacks as economy. Suddenly you put a 2 or 3 inch lift kit on it, and now everyone wants it, and Audi calls that the Q3. I think a lot of those cars proportionally don't work. The styling looks really out of whack when you make them into something that they're objectively not. So I appreciate the fact that Lexus has just leaned into making this be basically a hatchback, because the styling of it works so much better than if it were raised up and kind of squished in funny ways. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2022 Lexus UX 250h. As always, thank you so much for coming along. If you like what we're up to, please like, share, and subscribe right here on YouTube. You can also give us a follow on other social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Out Motorsports. And if you'd like to connect with other LGBT automotive enthusiasts, you can head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a whole community over there, and we would love to have you join us. Until next time, please stay safe, be well. We'll see you for the next one.